Okay, let's talk about 1849. So my experience with this is different from most games that I cover. Usually, I can come up with a pretty good feel for how well I'm going to like a game, and I may not understand all the salient points, but the general view fairly early on, often before I finish playing a game. Every now and then, a game warms to me, or I warm to a game as I begin to see certain charm in it. Sometimes in the course of that first play, sometimes over time. Usually the latter when my tastes change. So like the Avalon Hill Classics and some of the simpler SPI games, I kind of maybe had a fondness for at one point or another, but never really felt like they served a great piece in my life. And now, as I've grown kind of older and less willing, or more, not so much less willing to deal with the really complex games, more willing to accept the not really complex games sometimes, and to see the pleasure in a simpler representation sometimes. But what happened here is very odd. First of all, I misplayed it so badly on the first video that I had to come back to it. And then I failed completely in a start, not in terms of the rules. I got the rules wrong the first time. And to some extent, maybe kind of I'm happier with the wrong rules, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. And also people convinced me, hey, the game is actually better without the optional rules. So I was also playing without the optional rules in the second and third play. The second play ended up after the first operating round or whatever. It was clear everything was fucked up for too many people. And then the third video is the one that I just went through. And there, I'm walking out of it with that same, wow, that first set of operating, the first stock round, the initial auction, the stock round, and then the first couple operating rounds. Boy, is that harsh, and you can easily lose the game there. Now, I haven't lost that opinion. And some of the other factors I have tempered, which is the idea that you have to do all this pre-planning. I'm getting more comfortable with the level of pre-planning, although it's still too big a burden for my taste in the game. But I've definitely warmed to it as I got away from that front-loaded high-risk beginning to the game. Now, that's not to say that every XX game sort of has that front-loaded high risk. You could screw up right at the beginning and lose yourself, and be out of the game for 6 hours and sitting there saying, huh, well, I wish I had known that. Sucks to be me. In most cases, an experienced player, I think, can point out, hey, you're really taking a high risk there, or you realize if you do that, somebody else can like cut you off and you won't be able to start that company. That may be possible here, but I feel like there's a high level of calculation to figuring out, can you guarantee you're going to get to start your company right at the beginning of the game? The inherent desire in an XX game is to start a company right off the bat. You have to kind of convince me not to. Now, that could be my personality, I'm sure. Some newer players might be willing to just be an investor early on. I've seen that. But I think in general, people want to control their destiny as much as possible. So that right off the bat feeling is, can I start this company? Yes, I have the money. I'm allowed to start it. And then you find out isn't going to work or whatever. And there's just a lot of cases where it's not going to work, and there's a lot of possibilities of it not working. So there's this very high chance that what looks like a good move to a completely naive player is a horrible move, and there's a fair burden to figuring out, at least for me still, whether or not I can make it. You know, I have to assess what every other player is going to do and all that in order to figure out, am I safe in starting this company? So maybe the safe move is, I'm not going to start a company, you know, or unless I'm absolutely certain I'm not going to start a company, I'm just going to invest. But again, that's giving someone else the driver's seat and probably an advantage in the game overall that may not be easy to recoup. I'm not saying the investor is a bad idea. I'm saying, though, if a lot of people are sitting in that position because they're afraid to start a company, you may well watch one person kind of rule the game in the early part, and they're going to be pulling the bigger profits too, probably. Anyhow, as the game goes on, it still maintains that higher burden of not so much on can I start this company or not, although that's a decision that you get to make every now and then, but rather in the sense of the way the financing for the corporations is handled. It's a partial cap, but you're allowed to release shares into the bank pool. But the problem with that is you can't do that to just get yourself the cash that you need. You have to do it a full operating round in advance, which means you can't look at things and say, oh, I've got an opportunity that I didn't expect, or, oh shit, I'm screwed in a way that I didn't expect, and then just raise capital that way. I find that particularly disturbing because to me it requires this heavy mental burden every time you're coming around to your operating round, figuring out, do I need that cash? Do I need to sell these shares? What needs to happen? And, you know, it's quite possible that you have the funds available had you just planned a little better, and instead you're just crushed by, you know, not seeing something coming. And on the other hand, you know, what's kind of nice about that is that you have to release those funds, and there's a risk involved in releasing those funds if you're not going to use them. Now you've just lost income for your corporation, and if the opportunity that you pre-planned doesn't show up, and this is an opportunity for other people to screw you over, well, you've taken a step, and now you're paying for it, which is kind of a nice situation, but I don't think it's worth that burden. Overall, how do I feel about this? It is not going to be among my favorites for that because of the burden and that high initial risk level. On the other hand, I don't absolutely hate it, as I was saying I did early on in my final video series, because this provides a different sort of risk portfolio than any other XX game that I've played. To me, it's an outlier, which means, you know, it's not on the main line of the games that I really like, and if you look at those, I feel like actually 1817, which is an oddball on its own, may be the best game of that flavor. And I've always had a nice, a warm spot in my heart for 1856, and of course 1830, which are highly economic manipulation and the potential to devastate someone by playing with the stocks, by playing with the rate at which the trains come out and everything. I think all three of them are kind of the most interesting to me. Being able to tinker with the economics of the companies well enough to be able to do some really nifty stuff. Now, that kind of stuff requires pre-planning on a level that is probably about what this is, to do something really exciting with it. But usually most of the players aren't forced into that position. If you're trying to do something really nifty, you might be, and you might have to make decisions every operating round as to swallowing and such not, in a similar fashion that you have with the release of the shares. And obviously there's a similarity to it all. It's just there's more options here that create a greater burden, rather than more options that create more leniency. The optional rules, the bonds, give you a lot more leniency. But again, you want to optimize your money, so not only do you have the swallow option, which you can make right before you buy the train, you have the bond option, which you can make right before you buy the train, but you also still have that stock release option, which you have to do after you made your choice on the train, i.e. a full operating round in advance, which is painful. Especially if you don't know if people are going to buy your share during an intervening stock round, but that's a different issue. Because you'll be just costing yourself to get... You're getting rid of risk by paying a premium on your stock value, and I think that's a great trade-off, and I have no problem with that at all. Okay, so let's go into some other stuff component-wise. We got to talk about them, I guess. This one's a little shorter than a lot of the XX games, although the extra thinking might cause an issue. Nice little map. Game seems to work well. Yeah, so something I didn't mention here. This may be, again, me not being capable and competent in the game. Despite, a fair XX pedigree behind me and a good deal of thinking and whatnot. But some of the things that happened in the game felt almost random. Obviously they're not. It's an XX game. Nobody other than 53 and maybe another one or two weirdos out there. But for the most part, every decision that's out there is made by another player. It's made in the open. You can calculate it all. It's not even like diplomacy with hidden plotted movement or anything. It's all there in front of you. You can see what might or might not happen, like in a game of chess. But it felt like, and I think in a multiplayer, type circumstance where a lot of people are making decisions, it's not absolutely clear what the best decision for any given player is. You may not see some of the possible choices. That's incompetence, essentially. But it just felt like, wow, I had no idea this would fall this way. Now, that's certainly one of the charms of XX, but it feels more extreme here. Like, to the extent that, oh, look, I got wiped out and I thought I was fine. What? Again, though, if you're playing this a whole hell of a lot, you might get good enough that that's not an issue. I don't like that in a game. I don't think that you should have to be an expert in a game to be able to have a running chance in it. But on the other hand, a game like this especially should be about skill. But I don't know what. The question is, how much expertise do you need to have to feel like the game's just not like playing you, as opposed to you're playing the game. And when you're looking at a fixed, this is one of the random things, but it's available from the beginning. You see the random setup, and then you say, well, now I assess what's good. you have a random order of companies that come out in a fixed order. And that impacts the value of the various private companies that you're going to be bidding on. But it also, and this is one of the randomness factors, it's not clear what other people want to bid necessarily. And so you can't determine where the priority is going to land and what company you're going to get an option to start, you know. And then you have the hard choice, and this is why it comes up to being random. Do you want to start the company you're offered, or do you just pass on it and maybe give up an option to start a company right at the beginning of the game or whatever? And again, when I'm looking at something like that, I feel like the opponent's decisions are basically coin tosses, which is why I can't predict it. So I can't predict what the likely outcome of my own choices is going to be. But anyway, back to the opponents. The rule book felt a little sketchy, and a little light in terms of like explanation and driving things. I haven't been looking at it recently too much because you know, I've been playing this a fair amount now. But so I've gotten kind of used to it, but I remember feeling like it was clunkier than, well, you know, the problem is I think the fact that XX games are designed for XX game players, there's a tendency to like skim over stuff and use less words to explain stuff, which means that if you're looking at the outlier, if you're looking at kind of the odder games in the series and not these main lines like 1830 or something like that, the rules tend to be a little bit less holding your hand, showing you what to do. Well, showing you what, you know, how the game should go. I found painful. So the trains is on every company card. Not that I'd looked there, but basically there's 3 charts that you need that cover the rules. One is the trains and the game phases, which you have copied, maybe not entirely, on each corporation card. Another is all the private companies. That's usually a hard thing to remember what they all do. So the chart there is very helpful, but it's also not in the easiest place to access it. And then you have a list of the public companies, and normally that wouldn't be that big a deal. Normally that's the resources that you have sitting on you. They are present here. The important thing being the token fee. That's the thing that I had to keep looking up. Hey, which company am I starting? What's that going to cost me? Because unlike most of the XX games where you buy a token when you need it, there are a few of them where you don't. This is one of those. For whatever reason, some of them charge you, I think most of them, charge you the cost of your tokens up front when you start the company. You're going to be able to play these whenever you like, that's great, but you still have to pay for them, and you have to pay for them out of your initial money. Now, initial money is really short in this game, and it's not based on the number of tokens in this game. It's based on what the company is. So the best starting company has a token fee of 130 pounds, or lira, sorry, bucks. The cheapest of them comes in at 30. That's a big difference when you're looking at like maybe buying 2 shares at $100 and have to buy a $100 train. You basically have to buy an additional share of that best company, or most promising company at the beginning of the game. It means that it can't easily get 2 trains. It means a lot of different things. One of the things that it means is that there are a couple of companies that can really, really be hard to start. And if you don't have enough starting cash because of your bids on your initial portfolio, you've got to say no to them no matter what. You just don't have the cash to pay for their tokens up front and to pay for that starting train. Although maybe you can force yourself to buy the train out of pocket. You still have to have the cash though, so I don't know. You have very few choices for stock value at the beginning of the game. When the game starts, you may choose 68 or 100, and then you only have 2 more that become open as the game goes on. So you don't have a lot of flexibility as to, I have X amount of money, what do I want to set the starting value at? It's particularly weird because these aren't par values or anything. They're just your starting value for your company. I have never quite understood why you are limited to certain values on the chart. But this exceedingly limited version, wow, I really don't get. And of course, it means that like you don't have to calculate as many. You don't have to take as many choices into account to see if you can make it with that. But I don't know. Which again, that tends to be a randomness factor, right? Here, the randomness is, can you make it? In most games, the randomness is, well, what is my starting value for the company? How much cash did I make? You know, it feels like it's all determined by player decisions, but there's so much complexity in the interlocking of those decisions that you end up with values that, you know, choices that basically are predetermined, but not necessarily knowable to the player within any reasonable level. And that's what a lot of this game has going around it. So you got, you know, stock materials here. I don't mind that at all. I'm glad the board is hard. I'm never too thrilled with a cardstock board. You got the nice wooden pieces, which I have my gripes about. I have my gripes about everything, right? Company cards, lots of them. So the shares. In this game, there's a 20% share at the back of the list. That creates some interesting dynamics as to, hey, what are you going to buy? What are you know, are you going to buy that last certificate before the 20% share is revealed, whatever. There's some danger to that 20% share in that it can cause a company to change hands in a way that isn't available normally. I kind of like the 20% share on the presidency and maybe some others early on. I don't like it when they're on the back like that. That feels weird, but again, okay, you know, I'm not sure what it's meant to represent, but it may indicate some different kind of corporate board structure that allows for an easier challenge to happen. I don't know. You know, you do some hand waving and you can make it sound like it makes sense, almost, kind of, sort of. So that's not the issue that's not the biggest issue I have with it. The biggest issue I have with it, well, in comparison to like 1835, which also has 20% shares on the back of certain companies, I think, is that there is a 60% limit on holding any corporation, which means it's very unlikely for the president of the company to actually be able to get that 20% share. They probably have at least 50% of their company just to make sure they're holding it if there's any kind of fight for it. They also want to get money into the company and don't want to sell shares of it. So there's a good chance they buy up some of those early shares. They never get the opportunity to buy that 20% share, and that feels kind of cheap to me. Like, I feel like they should have a shot at it somehow or another. I don't know how big a deal either of those criticisms are. So, whatever. All right. Let's take a peek at the rules for anything that I haven't really touched on. I don't know if there is anything. You have the fake B&O. You have a private company that works kind of like the B&O company, but it's assigned to the first company, which is randomly determined, that comes out at the beginning of the game, and it only costs $150, and you can set the per share value at $100. It gives you the presidency of that company, so you immediately make $50 off of it plus the $25 if you're paying face value to it, which means it's a much more valuable thing to buy than the B&O usually is. Now, it's possible that this thing could cause you trouble. If you don't have enough token value, if you don't have the money to cover the tokens or whatever, it could cause some issues there. But it does guarantee that one company at least has shares and is losing or making money early in the game. You have a company who can be placed in many different places on the board. Any one of them. Most of them are not good choices at the beginning of the game, and kind of remain not necessarily very good choices. But it does give you some flexibility where you could build track out to help that. That's kind of a neat thing. Shares that are sitting in the bank pool at the end of the stock round cause the stock value to go down. Nobody wants to buy them? Well, must not be a very valuable company. So investor confidence gets dropped. Everywhere on the board damn near costs you money to lay track, and upgrades cost you money too, and that makes this a really tight money game. Yes, every share, a lot of share, because it's partial cap, there's a lot of shares in the corporate treasury. The corporations get that money from them, so early on they're making money per share. You're allowed to buy things back into the corporate treasury, so you have ways of generating a revenue for a while and also increasing your share value on that. Stock values don't go up unless your run beats the stock value. Early on in the game, that's a big issue. You're not making stock value off those companies, so being an investor is less valuable than it is in many other games. If anything, you may actually lose money rather than breaking even or gaining money off stock value, which is kind of interesting. You got the multiple different types of track. It's not different types of trains, at least, on different types of track. Basically, the narrow gauge track is more expensive to move through. It costs you twice as much, and you're paying per hex for movement. That makes it really difficult to justify for most of the trains for most of the game, except right at the end of the game there's this weird little R6H train that runs better on narrow gauge, isn't very big, it only runs 6, so I mean at best you could say it's a 12H, but it's cheap as hell. And that can cause real disasters in terms of, if you really needed a big train and you're all saved up for that, but you're counting on paying out of pocket, and oops, the R6H is available, and you didn't have enough money in your company to buy the big train you wanted, the 16H in this case, well, now you're stuck with this little thing, and that's your train for the company. And you may have real trouble making enough money to get the train that you were designing your track for. Again, sort of one of these, wow, a random pitfall that just opens up in front of me, and it's not completely random again. It's all determined from player action, but it's hard to predict player action. You got this Messina earthquake, which is just this random thing. When the first 12H is bought, Messina is leveled back to its starting position as a yellow track, and if anybody's got a station there, their station is just gone for the game. If it's the only station they have, their company's gone from the game. Well, it's gone, but it can come back, and that's one of the things. Corporations can come back after they close. This has a company closed space on the stock market. These are things that I feel like you can use. I've used them in 1856. I could see using it here. The problem, of course, is if you have any percentage of shares in your company, it's going to be real hard to like justify that. You've got to be using it as a feeder or something like that, and you've got to have something that makes perfect sense. But there may be rare cases where you want to close the company. Much more in this game than in 56, I think, is the danger because of the difficulty of moving forward, of early in the game actually being in a position where somebody could close your company on you if they wanted to. Let's talk a little bit about the options because I played with them in the first game. So there are basically three. Acquiring station tokens. I like this one. I really like this one. And I think there was another game that had it, may have been 18OE, where you're allowed to buy station tokens off of another company for an agreed upon price. And they just swap, you just take it over. And that makes raping a company even more powerful. It can also allow you to grab a location with one company, knowing that you can buy it up with the other, just like you would with a train. Hey, I need this train for the other company. I want to make sure I get it while I can. Although there's usually better reasons with trains. Bonds. So bonds allow you to pull $500 from fairly early in the game in order to buy a train, and you can pretty much do it right away. You're able to, like, as far as I can tell, you can issue the bond at any time during your operating round. No, it says at the end of the operating turn, so I think it actually is just as limited as the other financing. So it still doesn't give you any flexibility, and you can still crash a horrible death by not taking a bond out the turn before. And then the final thing is the E-Train, which is basically a diesel, which is a big deal because of the narrow track. It's able to run over as much track as it likes. And it's got a kind of funky way of buying it. You have to buy an E-Train token, which is expensive, and then you can buy E-Trains, which are fairly cheap. But any corporation that wants to run an E-Train, that wants to own an E-Train, has to buy an E-Train token first. So you have an upfront high cost, and then you have a fairly cheap cost per train. So you can buy one train that's about as expensive as it gets. I don't remember what the 16H was. 16H just 11,000. Great. It doesn't have a name. Oh, maybe it has it here. Yeah, the 16H is just 11,000. Well, that's the cost that, the high-end price of the E-token. The first person who buys one has to pay a higher price, but it goes down to 816, and then it goes down further if you're the second or further player to get it. But then the E-Train itself costs $550. So you're looking at like $1,350 for a better train than the 16H. And it is better. If you have a really nice open track positioning, you can go further with it. But anyway, like I said, I'm glad I own it, as with many games, because it does provide a different perspective than most XX games, well, than any other XX game that I have. Let's put it that way. And it's an interesting perspective. It's not my favorite perspective. But yeah, I mean, what I wouldn't want is a clone of a game that, you know, I like a lot. I like this. I would rather have something like this that diverges from my taste a little bit more than something that I would call a clone. So like, you know, the 18AL and 18GA are basically clones of 1830, a little bit mellower. They do just, there are things designed in them so that they're a little bit less harsh than 1830 tends to be. Maybe more trains or something. I don't remember what. No, the handling of the privates, you can't rape as hard, I think. But I do like the idea that most 18XX designers kind of come to the game with a, I'm trying to make a significantly different game. When I first looked at this, I thought, why are people excited about this? It looks like 1830 with lots of yucky terrain in it. Sounds kind of like 1886 or something like that, which really didn't give me much excitement. This is significantly different. And so giving that different perspective and that very different risk platform is pleasing, even if there are other XXs that I like better. But I have warmed to it a little bit. My initial feeling was just that, wow, this is just too random. But I'm not sure that it is. It takes some getting. I feel like you have to accept a certain heavier burden than you do in most of the XX games to play this one, without just crashing and burning. And that's something I don't really like about it at all. And that's why it's going to get a lower rating than my usual XXs, even though there are things I do really like about it. That burden is just more than I want to face in general. All right, let's send it up.